It's Friday, the sun is shining, the international break is almost over, and we are back live with another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Happy Friday to each and every one of you. I hope you've had a wonderful week so far. The international break is nearly over. There is some FA Cup action this weekend. Of course, Arsenal not involved, but a couple of decent games, I would say, to kind of sit down and watch. Of course, we've got football going on in a number of other countries as well. So if you fancy going a little bit more continental in terms of your choices this weekend, you can do that as well. So plenty to keep us occupied. And yeah, looking back to getting into the kind of normal swing of things. I want to start off by saying a massive thank you to everybody who's stuck with the podcast, who's been listening in during the international break, because I know it's a difficult period, isn't it? For us as content creators, it's tough because there isn't that much going on. And you're talking about stories that you're reading, as we always do, but you always know that there's an element of, well, it's the international break, so they've got to write something to each and every one of these stories. Now, I'm not saying that people are making stuff up or that the reports should be discarded completely. I don't think that's fair, and I wouldn't want to essentially sort of rain on anyone's parade in terms of their journalism, but you do feel as a content creator that at times during the international breaks, you are struggling a little bit. So a massive thank you to everybody who's tuned in, whether that's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever. I really, really do appreciate it. And thank you, as always, for your continued support. We've got quite a bit to get into today. We're going to talk about a report concerning Viktor Gyökeres, a player that we've been linked with quite a bit in the past, a player who, when we were talking about other striking options just a few days ago, kept coming up in the live chat box. There's a lot of you that believe that Viktor Gyökeres is the one that we should be looking at in terms of filling that centre forward role come the summer. We'll get into what the latest is on his future. We're also going to touch on the Andrea Berta stuff because according to a number of reports out of Italy, Gianluca Di Marzio, I think, went first on this. Fabrizio Romano has then followed it up. At the time of recording, the last update we have is that an announcement of Andrea Berta joining Arsenal is imminent. They said in those reports that it was a matter of hours. Now, by the time you listen to this or watch this back, we might well have that announcement. What I will say is that we're all very, very confident that this has happened and is happening. And there's no reason to be concerned by the delay in the announcement. It could be that they're waiting for him to start on April 1st or whatever. And we know that Arsenal are not a club that put things out there until they're ready. And so, yeah, no concern from me. I think, as I've said before, he's a really, really good, strong appointment. I guess we can start there, seeing as sort of by default, we've kind of rolled into that. I think he's a really, really good appointment, a really strong appointment, and someone that brings a fresh pair of eyes to the Arsenal project with a track record to be proud of and a track record that will give us encouragement and belief that we've got someone at the top now who knows his stuff and who is a very, very effective operator in that kind of sporting director environment. He's also done other roles over the years, Andrea Berta, so he has a really well-rounded understanding of what's required at a top football club. His recruitment generally at Atletico Madrid was very good. He wasn't afraid to spend big money on players if he thought that they were the right players. And his relationship with Diego Simeone, I think, is something that I look at and I feel really comfortable about. And the reason I say that is because I'm not comparing Mikel Arteta to Diego Simeone, right? Simeone is a different character. His style of football is different. And he's also someone who, you know, who has a lot of weight and a lot of clout wherever he works because of how well he's done, particularly at Atletico Madrid. And so I compare him to Mikel Arteta in that sense, whereby we've got a manager who I don't think calls every shot and I don't think has the final say on every aspect of every decision, but certainly has a big influence. And so if Andrea Berta has shown in the past that he can work with a manager of a similar influence to that of Diego Simeone in terms of how much they steer the ship at their club, then that gives me encouragement that they can work together, that they can strike up a really good, strong working relationship, and they're not going to be butting heads all the time. Now, will there be some healthy challenges? I'd hope so, because I think challenge is really, really important in an elite environment. So I hope that there is going to be some challenge and some pushback from Andrea Berta, and it's not all going to be Mikel Arteta's way. Equally, I don't want it to be all Andrea Berta's way. I want them to work in tandem. I want them to work together in cooperation to make Arsenal the best that they can be. So, yeah, really, really excited about this appointment. And I think based on those reports, we're going to hear about it officially sooner rather than later. A few hellos to people in the chat. We've got Damien. We've got Raunanwar Hussein, who says, good morning from St. Cloud in Minnesota. It's my favorite podcast, as always. I know YouTube clips can sometimes mislead, but I think Ekatike is the guy with top-notch potential. I prefer him over Sesko. So Raunanwar kind of agreeing with my sentiments of yesterday that, yes, okay, Benjamin Sesko is an option that a lot of people would like to see come in, and it's a name that we've heard a lot about. But is there much between him and Ekatike at this stage? Probably not. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I just want to make sure that we get to some of your comments and some of your questions. We've got Joey, who's in the chat for the first time in a while. Sammers is with us as well. Frankfurt Guna says, Zubimendi, far from done, can be deleted. Yeah, that was the title I went with just the other day, because we heard of Real Madrid kind of stepping up their interest. Now, if you listen to what David Ornstein had to say yesterday in his Q&A with The Athletic, it seems that Arsenal are confident that they're going to get Martin Zubimendi in through the door. And that's good news if you're someone who is massive on the idea of signing Martin Zubimendi. Now, I like the player, and I think he's got a lot of attributes that I would welcome into this Arsenal team. But I'd be lying if I said I don't have my concerns about him. I'm not going to go over them again because it feels like we're touching on it every podcast at the minute. But obviously, having gone from thinking he was wrapped up as far as Arsenal were concerned to being worried and concerned by the Real Madrid interest, because Real Madrid, as we've said time and time again, have an incredible pull and can certainly gazump us when it comes to salaries and things like that, to now feeling a little bit more confident that this is a deal that's going to happen, because David Ornstein seems to believe that at the moment we're on course to achieving that signing, which is, I think, overall good news, because he's obviously very well sought after. I would argue that him being well sought after by other clubs doesn't necessarily by default means he's a great fit for us, but it would be quite the coup, wouldn't it, given that Liverpool tried to sign him last summer. They couldn't get it done. They couldn't get him over the line. And Real Madrid, if they do genuinely have an interest and he still opts to come to Arsenal, I think that's a big indication of how we're viewed now by the rest of the continent, and how this project is viewed, despite what some of the naysayers, like to peddle in terms of narrative. Jack has some thoughts on Ekatike. I wasn't planning on talking about him today, but we'll go down that path. That's the benefit of the international break. Less structure means more tangents, which is fine. Jack says Ekatike isn't a clinical finisher or a great ball striker, which is what we need more from our new number 9. I would agree that we need more of that, because I think if you're talking about movement, physical presence, and work rate, for instance, Kai Havertz does all of those things. And let's not forget, he's going to be back next season. And I think it would be a real shame for us to just kind of completely overlook the good work that Havertz has done as a centre forward and not even have him considered as an option anymore. The good thing about Havertz is that he can play left 8 and he can play at centre forward, which, a bit like when we were talking about Nwaneri yesterday, means that by default, he's in line to get more game time. And even if we bring in that striker, they're going to probably share the role. And if we sign a Sesko or an Ekatike, who's that little bit younger and probably needs a bit more time to adapt, rather than, for instance, Alexander Isak, who is tried and tested in the Premier League, understands what it takes, and would essentially walk straight into the team, you're going to still be quite reliant on the likes of Kai Havertz. So, but it's a really valid point that you make. It's an observation that I take on board for sure. Frankfurt Guna, who's a Frankfurt fan as well as an Arsenal fan, I'm assuming, says, I can tell you Ekatike lacks the box dominance and physicality that Sesko has. So, yeah, interesting observations. Harish joining us says, do we have a realistic chance of landing Isak, or should we move on to more realistic targets? I think a £130 million bid gets him. What do you think? Honestly, I have no idea what Newcastle are looking for. We've read reports of 150. We've read reports of 100. I think, again, as I've said many, many times, and we'll move on from the Isak stuff in a minute. But as I've said many times, for me, a lot of the talk is about sort of the price. And I think the price plays a part, a massive part, in fact. But I think ultimately Isak's willingness to stay or want to move is going to make the difference. And I think that a lot of that is going to be down to whether or not Newcastle United make the Champions League. So if you've got hopes of us signing Alexander Isak this summer, you should be supporting every team that Newcastle United come up against between now and the end of the season, because I honestly believe that if they fail to qualify for the Champions League, that weakens their position in terms of keeping him. Has he got a contract? Yes. Do they have to sell him as a result of that? No. But at the same time, if the player's pushing and the fee is on the table, then as a football club, particularly one that has their hands tied behind their backs at the moment in terms of PSR, I think you've got to at least consider it. Now, I know there's a lot of talk around Newcastle that actually going into the summer, because they've kept their powder dry in the last couple of windows, they'll be in a much better position than they have previously. That's fine, and maybe that's the case. But is it going to be the type of position that puts them in a place where they can really push on in the way that people thought they would when the Saudi ownership came in? I would argue no. So Newcastle could really benefit from a big sale if they then invest that money right. And the fans won't want to hear that for sure. And Eddie Howe, I'm sure, won't want to hear that. But the club have to look at it from a slightly different perspective. And yeah, if they miss out on the Champions League and they miss out on that revenue as well, and then you've got Alexander Isak sort of pushing and saying, look, I want to go, then all of a sudden our hand becomes a lot stronger. But listen, if he's available for 120 million, 130 million, I can guarantee you we will not be the only club looking at him. And so that brings an element of competition, doesn't it? So this is not straightforward. This is not cut and dry by any stretch of the imagination. It brings me on nicely to talk about another striker. We're going to talk Viktor Gyökeres, because again, he has been in the news this morning, and we'll tell you exactly what's been written about the Swedish international striker currently playing his football in Portugal right after this. Welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast, with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Okay, let's talk Viktor Gyökeres. So when I was having my cornflakes this morning and my morning coffee, yes, I still eat cornflakes like a 7-year-old. I was reading some sort of transfer rumors and all sorts of stories that were floating around online, and I came across one with regards to Viktor Gyökeres. And the reason it kind of caught my eyes, I know a lot of our dear listeners are very invested in Viktor Gyökeres. I know a lot of our listeners believe that he's the right one, the one that we should go for, and the one that represents the least risk. And let me explain and expand on that a little bit, because when I say least risk, he's a little bit older. He moved on from Coventry City, went to Portugal, continued scoring goals, in fact, upped his rate. Scores goals in European competition, which is obviously a really good indicator. And I think the feeling has always been that if you're comparing him to Alexander Isak, there's no comparison in terms of the quality of the player. But what you feel you could sign Viktor Gyökeres for is significantly less than what you'd pay for Alexander Isak. And therefore, if the upside might be less, but the risk is a lot less. And given that people, I think, generally believe that when everybody's fit and available, we do have goals in this team, people are maybe looking at it and going, we're probably better off spending a little bit less on that centre forward if it means we can go and get top tier talent in the other positions that we need to strengthen as well. If we could go get, for instance, Gyokeres or Sesko and a top winger as well, that might be more beneficial than just paying for the one big name striker and not reinforcing in those wide areas. So there's all sorts of different ways of looking at this, and people have different and varying opinions, and that is absolutely fine. But I was always of the belief that given what his release clause was, which recently, not that long ago, as far as I understood, it was 100 million euros. I always thought this was a deal that you could do for maybe like 75, 80, something like that. I don't know exactly. But reading what I've read this morning, it feels like actually Sporting would be willing to do this deal at a hell of a lot less, in which case it's a bit of a game changer, isn't it? The way I look at Viktor Gyökeres as a potential signing now is quite different after reading this, if indeed, of course, it is true or even close to the truth. According to The Sun, I know it's The Sun, but yeah, according to The Sun, Viktor Gyökeres will be allowed to leave Sporting this summer if a team comes up with a transfer fee in the region of 50 to 58 million pounds. All of a sudden, he's in the same price bracket now as Benjamin Sesko. And I do think that when you look at the numbers, Viktor Gyökeres kills Benjamin Sesko, destroys him, obviously hypothetically. But the point I'm trying to make is, well, all of a sudden, if they're in the same price bracket, then this changes things, doesn't it? All of a sudden, Viktor Gyökeres becomes as good an option as Benjamin Sesko. Sesko, you'd be paying for potential, but also in paying for potential, it means that you're going to get a fee that's slightly less because he's got less of a back catalogue to kind of show and less of a back catalogue to convince people that he's the finished article. Gyokeres felt like he was ahead of Sesko in my estimations of who's better for the here and now. And make no mistake about it, Arsenal need to win here and now. It's not about 3-4 years down the line. If you can bring in players that can help you now, but have that incredible potential as well, that's awesome and fantastic. But ultimately, the priority is now. And so my issue with Gyokeres was always, well, I don't want to pay 100 million euros for him. If you can get him for 50 million pounds, there or thereabouts, all of a sudden this looks very, very different to me. And he becomes a far more attractive prospect. So in terms of the strikers that we're being linked with now, I'll rank them for you in terms of where I place them. And this is taking into consideration age, profile, price, potential, injury records. I'm taking everything into account. Number 1 is Alexander Isak. No doubt about that for me. Number 2 now at this price is Viktor Gyökeres. Number 3 is Hugo Ekitike for me. And number 4 is Benjamin Sesko. That's how I rank these guys in terms of my personal want list come the summer. Now, there might be a name in the mix that we haven't heard about yet. There might be someone that Arsenal are eyeing up that we haven't really had the volume of reports around to, to suggest that it's a realistic option or a realistic target. But we've been linked plenty with Isak. We've been linked plenty with Gyokeres, with Sesko, and in the last few days with Hugo Ekitike. And so I'm ranking those 4, and that's how I do it. Isak 1. In second place, I'm going Gyokeres at that price, 50 to 58 million. Third, I'm going Ekitike. And fourth, I'm going Benjamin Sesko. I could be wrong. And people will have different opinions, and feel free to put your lists in the chat if you're with us live right now, or do it in the comment section a little bit later on if you're watching us on catch up. But that's how I feel about the options that we're being heavily linked with. Olu in the chat says, where's Osimhen? I haven't seen enough credible reporting around Osimhen to even believe that is a viable option. I do like Victor Osimhen, always have. As a big Serie A fan, I watched him do brilliant things at Napoli, but he's not someone that's being talked about in serious terms at the moment. Therefore, I've not included him in that. It's nothing personal to the player, because I know I'm going to get that. I know I'm going to get some people going, oh, why don't you like Victor Osimhen? Is it because of this or that? And it's not. It's just because I don't think it's a realistic option. Mod Brave in the chat makes a really, really good point. Maybe Berta will get that guy Symeou, who he sold at Madrid. I heard he plays in Spain as well. Symeou is at Porto this season, where he's been incredible from what I've been reading. I haven't seen a great deal of him, but there is that Andrea Berta connection there. Maybe that makes that an option. I don't know. But yeah, that's where I'm at in terms of the strikers and how I would rank them at this moment in time. Just a quick reminder before we move on to the next topic, the next subject. If you haven't done so already, please, guys, leave a like on the video. It really, really, really does help. I'm trying to see how many likes you've got or you've put on over here. I can't see at the moment. But anyway, get the likes in. It really, really does help. Really does make a difference to the channel. Subscribe to the channel as well if you're new. And thank you again for bearing with us during this international break. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, leave us a review as well. All of that stuff really, really does help. Okay. Let's move on. Let's move on to some more interesting topics. That Bukayo Saka training pick. Oh, it was brilliant, wasn't it? It was brilliant. Just when you're at that point in the international break, when you're completely fed up, you're getting closer and closer to the big tie in the Champions League against Real Madrid, and you're sitting and you're sweating over Bukayo Saka's fitness, and you're wondering if he's going to make what is undoubtedly our biggest Champions League European tie in years. You're sitting there stressing about it, worrying about it, and boom, just what the doctor ordered. Arsenal drop a picture of Bukayo Saka in training after, of course, Bukayo Saka dropped one himself. And yeah, look, really, really encouraging. I've said to you guys all along that I think he's further ahead than we're being told. And I think that's common practice in football. I think that's understandable. There's always going to be an air of cautiousness around a player, A, of this importance, but B, who's obviously had to undergo surgery for such a serious injury. So, yeah, really, really excited about him being back. And as I say, that picture was just what the doctor ordered. I must have looked at it about 1,000 times yesterday, which is, yeah, it says it all, doesn't it? But yeah, really, really good and positive news. We're going to take some of your questions very, very shortly in the live chat. So start getting them in. But there was one other story that I wanted to dive into today. And it's with regards to Real Madrid, the opposition that we face, of course, in the quarterfinals of this year's UEFA Champions League. Yeah, really, really, hoping that this is true and hoping that something is going to come of this. Well, it's true that an investigation has been opened, but is anything going to come of it? I don't know. So what am I talking about? I hear you ask. 4 Real Madrid players are being investigated into allegations of indecent conduct during their Champions League last 16 win against Atletico Madrid. So Antonio Rudiger, Kylian Mbappe, Vinicius Jr., and Dani Ceballos all allegedly, and it is allegedly, made gestures towards the home fans after Real Madrid beat their city rivals on penalties. TV pictures show German defender Rudiger appearing to make a throat-slitting motion, apparently towards the crowd, while Mbappe was shown seemingly making a crotch-grabbing gesture. That's what they've described it as. Spanish media say that Atletico reported these actions to UEFA last week and that the players could be at risk of suspension. However, there's no guarantee that the case will be heard before the quarterfinal with Arsenal. First leg of that tie is, of course, on the 8th of April, and the return leg a week later. UEFA's statement said an ethics and disciplinary inspector has been appointed to investigate allegations of indecent conduct made by 4 Real Madrid players. Further information regarding this matter will be available in due course. What do I say? I say ban them all. Every single one of them. Ban them for the rest of the season. It's an utter disgrace. Utter disgrace. But look, no, joking aside, right? What a boost it would be if they were without 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even all 4 of those players, because they're really, really, really good bloody players. And, you know, you look at that Real Madrid side and it is intimidating. You know, as much as I think that we're a really good and well-drilled and well-organized side, and that if we manage to get Bukayo Saka into that starting 11, we'll actually only be one player away from our best 11, which gives us a chance. You look at that Real Madrid team packed with stars and it does strike fear into you. You go to somewhere like the Bernabeu and it is intimidating. It is overwhelming. It is very, very difficult to come out on top there, as we've seen many, many times over the years. There's a reason that they are serial European champions, right? Knowing our luck, A, there isn't going to be a ban. And B, even if there was going to be a ban, the ban would probably come after we face them, because knowing our rotten luck, the case wouldn't be heard in time for any ban to apply in the game that we play against them. So don't get your hopes up about this. I mean, if it was to be found that they did do what they're accused of, and that is decided to have been over the line, etc., etc., and you get those bans, then amazing. It would be huge, but I just can't see it, to be honest with you. And also as well, like UEFA wanting to upset Real Madrid, I don't think so. We've seen Real Madrid throw their toys out of the pram many, many times for things as not trivial as, but as for things like who wins the Ballon d'Or, and they seem to get their way, and they use their clout as a football club, and it's very, very unlikely, isn't it, that this is going to happen. Let's go over to some of your questions then to wrap up the show. There's some good questions. There's some silly questions as well, but we'll take on all of them because that's what we do here on the Chronicles of a Gooner. Listen, no questions. A stupid question. I'm trying to say that with all the sincerity in the world, but hey, you do get them sometimes. Anyway, let's go. Sephiroth, who's always in a very positive and happy mood about the Arsenal, in the live chat says, Harry, forget the talk about a new striker. The main issue is we have a shit manager. So when will you call for his head? When I feel like Mikel Arteta can take Arsenal no further, then I will call for his head, just like I would with any other manager. But you are in the minority if you believe that the Mikel Arteta thing is done. Have the players lost faith in him? Nope. As the majority of the crowd, those that attend the games, have they lost faith in him? Because, there's always a lot of noise online. But ultimately, when a manager loses its job, it's often when the crowd in attendance turns on him. And I don't see any signs of that when I go to Emirates Stadium. As I say, it's a very loud minority. And if I think that the time is right, I've got no qualms about saying that, we should move on. I had no issue saying that about Unai Emery when I felt the time was right. Why would I have any issues when it comes to Mikel Arteta? But right now, I still think we're in a good place overall. I think we've had a bad season for a number of reasons in terms of our league performance and in terms of the domestic cups. I mean, I say that we got to the semi-finals of one of the domestic cups. It isn't as doom and gloom as people want to make it out. But I don't believe that we're at the end of the road with Mikel Arteta. So I'm not going to call for his head. And if you want to call for his head, you're absolutely entitled to do that. But why are you questioning me? I'm allowed to have my opinion. And if you think my opinion is going to be swayed by angry people in the comment section, not going to happen. Not going to happen. Samus says, I fully believe we can beat Real Madrid with or without the stars missing. Still dead nervous for it, but was wondering how confident you are feeling. I don't feel confident or scared at the moment. I don't feel either one of those two emotions. I feel excitement. That's what this type of game brings first and foremost. And I think you've almost got to embrace that excitement so that you enjoy the whole experience. I remember growing up as a kid and sort of when I started, obviously when I was a kid, I used to go to the Arsenal with my dad. But when I got a little bit older, when I got to about 13, 14, even when my dad was working, I would travel there with friends or relatives that were going, and I'd go and sit in my seat and then I'd meet them after the game and whatever. So for a long, long time, I've been that match going kid that was always buzzing with excitement going into every single match. And obviously, the more you go, the novelty does wear off a little bit in the sense of like Tuesday night, I'm going to go down to Fulham, Arsenal Fulham. I'm excited because I'm always happy and buzzing to go and see Arsenal play. But has it got anywhere near the same excitement as like a Real Madrid game does? No. But the longer I've been going to games, if you like, and the longer I was that kid and the novelty was wearing off a little bit, the more excited I became for the really big games, the crunch games, your North London derbies, your Manchester Uniteds, your Liverpools, your Chelseas. And I was always that guy that when we was going through that run of draws against where we kept getting Barcelona or Bayern Munich and we kept going out, I was always that guy that when everyone saw the draw and went, oh, for God's sake, not again. I was always that kid that went, bring them on. This is exactly what the Champions League is about. This is what I want. I want to turn up and watch Arsenal go head to head with the best on the continent. I want to watch the best teams come to the Emirates Stadium. And I still feel that way all these years on. So for me, it's not nervousness. It's not concern at the minute. I'll probably feel like shit once the game starts. But right now, it's excitement for me. That's my overriding feeling around the Real Madrid game. And with the ban stuff, don't get carried away. Ain't going to happen. Yeah, it isn't going to happen. Yeah, don't start counting on that. I think it's a dangerous game emotionally to play. Larry says, I heard other clubs' fans talking about how an early Saka return will see him pick up an injury again, but they forget that his surgery and rehabilitation period has been calculated by a medical team to return early March. Yeah, that's it. We heard early March, didn't we, initially? And it's going to be April now by the time he's back. So, it shows that there's been an air of cautiousness already. And listen, they're in a much better position to judge, to judge whether he's ready or not. And we're going to see. And I think they're going to give him some minutes over the course of the next few days, and we'll kind of take a decision from there as to whether he's ready to start against Real Madrid. Mark says, how do I get a spanner next to my name, Harry? You have to become a mod of the chat, which means if you're a regular and you're someone who is grown increasingly annoyed by how much crap we get in the live chat nowadays, you can have the power to moderate it just a little bit. Russ says, Harry, how dare you have a mind of your own? The fan base will not tolerate this. Yeah, it feels that way, doesn't it? It really feels like this. Arsenal Avenger. Sorry, Sephiroth. But listen, you're entitled to your opinion, but this made me laugh. People like Sephiroth gave us Brexit. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anwar says, Harry, is Arsenal's problem just a striker issue? I feel like creativity against low block teams is also another issue. Yeah, I agree with that. And I've said for a long time that we need another creative force in the midfield. And I think that we've really kind of seen that this season when Odegaard's dropped off a little bit. We've seen that there's no one else really to step up to the plate. When Odegaard's dropped off in the past, you've got Saka either scoring goals or creating goals from the right-hand side because his assist numbers are incredible as well. And so there was a sharing of that burden. With Bukayo Saka being out for as long as he has, that has put a lot more, that has put a lot more reliance on Martin Odegaard. And unfortunately, with his form dropping off as well, that's been a problem for us. I agree. Olu says, have you analyzed Gyokeres' ability to play against low blocks? Not in any great detail, but when I think about what you need against a low block as a centre forward, well, you're often sent wide. When you're facing low blocks, they often like to funnel your play into the wide areas, and that's what they want you to do. And so having someone with a physical presence and an aerial presence, I think it was always helpful. And I think Viktor Gyökeres certainly has that. But what I like about him, as well as some of the other options that we looked at, is that it feels like he can run in behind as well. And I think we need variety to our centre forward. It can't just be a low block specialist or a high line specialist. It's got to be someone that can do both sides of the game, because at different times in different game states, we're going to require different skill sets and different characteristics. Okay, I think I am going to leave it there. We've talked Viktor Gyökeres, Andrea Berta, the Real Madrid players that could be banned. Fingers crossed, but it's not going to happen. Don't get carried away. We've discussed some of your questions as well. Thank you all so much for joining me. I really, really do appreciate it. And I will see you all on the next episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Until then, take care of yourselves. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, depending on where you're joining us from. And I'll see you all very soon. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a great weekend. Up the